It is now exactly 6:30. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. And I'm going to ask the clerk, since I see we have some members online, I'm going to ask the clerk to do a roll call.
Okay, we're doing roll call. Suresh Bhatia. Peggy Briggs.
Present.
Brian Conway.
Present.
Kathy Kukalo.
Here.
Eric Dahlberg. John Garofalo.
Here.
Pat Geyer.
Here.
Gerard Jansen.
Present.
Don Kupka.
Present.
Lindsay Liss.
Here.
Harlan Reed here. Paul Rodriguez.
Here.
Kazi Sadruzaman. Shri Tupel.
Yep.
And Lois Wassoff.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, first item on our agenda is public comment. I just remind everyone, public comment is limited to a total of 10 minutes with no more than 2 minutes allocated to any one speaker. And public comment is limited to items that are not on the agenda. There will be opportunities for public comment to be taken after our discussion on each agenda item. So are there any members of the public here who would like to say something? Anyone seeing any raised hands?
No. Nope.
Okay, then let's move on. The correspondence item will be very brief. There was none. Meeting minutes of July 31, 2025. They were in the packet that was posted yesterday and that you all received a notice about. So I'm going to ask now for any comments, corrections, additions, deletions from the draft of the July 31 minutes.
I see no one.
Hearing none, can I ask someone to move to approve the July 31 minutes as submitted?
So moved.
Moved.
Second.
Don second.
And I will ask the clerk to take a roll call.
Okay, thank you. This is a roll call on voting on the minutes as submitted or as presented. Peggy Briggs.
Aye.
Brian Conway.
Aye.
Kathy Kukalo.
Aye.
John Garofalo.
Yes.
Pat Geyer.
Yes.
Gerard Jansen.
Yes.
Don Kupka.
Aye.
Lindsay Liss.
Yes.
Harlan Reed, yes. Paul Rodriguez.
Yes.
Shri Tupel.
Yep.
Lois Wassoff.
Yes.
Did I miss anybody else? No.
It looks like Eric joined.
Eric Dahlberg is here now. Eric, how do you vote on the minutes?
Sorry, I'm late. Yes.
Thank you very much, Eric. That's a yes. Anybody else? No, please. All right, so the minutes pass approved, unanimous.
Great. Well, we're charging through this agenda today. This is great. All right, the liaison reports were included in the in your packet. I want to particularly thank Carlin for her summary of the chair's breakfast, which I did attend, but with the listening attentively. But it was a three-ring circus in my house that day, and I could not have taken notes. And I am very grateful. I think there may be, I want to ask people if they have any additions to the liaison reports. I want to specifically ask Kathy, who submitted some information about what's going on with the land use committee, but that came in too late to put it into the packet. So Kathy, would you mind summarizing what's going on with the land use working group?
First off, I'd like to apologize to everyone for my late submission. I'll be more mindful in the future. The land use working group continued its second month of meetings, organizing themselves And they are now running 3 subcommittees, one for public safety, one for public works, and one for municipal buildings. With those 3 subcommittees and the full committee, there are anywhere from 4 to 8 meetings per month. And Lois has offered to add a partner to work with me on this endeavor. The most important thing that's happened, I believe, this month in the committee is a discussion of the fact that the MCI advisory committee is well down the road of making their recommendations to the select board, while the land use working group is just starting. So there was a joint meeting of those 2 organizations with the select board to discuss how the select board sees the mission of both organizations. And one thing which is dear to our hearts that the MCI group talked about was that their recommendations put together a combination of factors that would generate revenue for the town to help offset the cost of acquiring and renovating that property. Unfortunately, the 3 areas that the land group is looking at are all for municipal purposes and would have to be paid for by taxpayers. So there's going to need to be a certain amount of overlay work to go on, and that was committed to. So both groups will be meeting periodically. That has not begun yet, but I will report on it as it does happen. Are there any questions?
Just one addition, which is that your partner on this is Gerard, who is here today. So, and I appreciate, you're already doing what I know Gerard will do to track the work of that group, because it's very important work, and it will have significant, potentially it has significant financial implications for the town, depending upon the decisions that are made.
Yes, absolutely. And Lois, that the land use group has done many site visits, very similar to the ones we did last year, looking at what the department, so we kind of have a leg up. We know what the fire department looks like and what the police station looks like. And, you know, one of the issues for the town is going to be that our taxpayers are not as aware of how much work really does need to be done to our municipal infrastructure. So I did suggest that the land use group might want to adopt a practice that we've done in the past 2 years, and that is to get into some sort of communication plan so that they can start prepping people for what may be coming down the road.
Yeah, I think the MCI group is a good model for that, because they've done a really good job of communicating what they are doing, and getting, they're at a somewhat different stage, but they've been getting input from people about how they feel about particular hypothetical uses. So I think there are aspects of that that could actually be very useful for the land use working group. So.
Yeah, and is this, you know, further complications with the MBTA overlay, putting so much concentrated housing. Well, it's not just the MBTA, but we have some very large housing complexes going up in West Concord. And you take a look at the fire station in West Concord, and it's certainly not going to be adequate for and especially if MCI also gets developed. So, you know, you put those three projects together, and you're going to have a lot of need for additional resources to service that community.
No, definitely. Thank you. Is Suresh here?
No, he's not.
He's not? Okay. Does anyone else have additions to the liaison reports? Carlin?
I have two short ones. One is about the retirement board. I attended their meeting recently and I saw that their current fund balance is roughly $247 million. This is something that we'll want to be aware of if they decide to come to town meeting with any type of warrant article. Second item is the Public Works Commission meeting that will be held. I have a short note that I expect it to be September 10. It will be September 10. That will be a public, a rate hearing on increasing the rates for the recycle bins and trash, the solid waste proceeding. It looks like it's going to go up by $20 a year. And instead of billing it twice a year, they're going to go to monthly billing. So if you're interested in those matters, attend the Public Works Commission meeting on September 10th. Thank you. That's it.
Any other additions? Tom?
And we just also put in a plug to attend the rate hearing for the CMLP. There's a major change coming in the way in which we pay for electricity. And it's going to just so that everybody has an opportunity to put in their 2 cents on it, going to a time of use function rather than a flat rate, and it'll greatly impact bills.
And I guess I just want to put in a general statement, the liaison reports, the number of reports that have been coming in over the summer do not match the number of committees that we are liaising with. It's the summer and a lot of committees aren't meeting. It's a quiet time, not for us, but for a lot of other groups of town. But I just want to urge people to get into the habit of being in touch with the committees that you're assigned to, checking on the dates, reaching out to the chair, making sure that you're getting the information you need to report back to the full finance committee. This is a really important function that we serve. And we do our job as a finance committee a lot better when we have a broader view of what's going on in town, and the work that each of us does as a liaison really helps to give us that broader view. So I'm looking forward to more liaison reports in the fall.
Lois, I just wanted to highlight something from mine because it's contrary to a lot of the conversations we have in this committee.
And yours was in the.
Mine are in the minutes or in the package, but it's from the Economic Vitality Committee. And the whole committee brought up the fact that like decreasing someone's taxes by a nominal amount can't be the reason for increases of economic vitality. They're not going to sell it. They don't really like the public doesn't want to hear it and doesn't want to support that. So even though I brought it up as a benefit, and you know we talk about it all the time, the entire committee thought that while it's a nice benefit, it's a secondary benefit and it has to be a secondary benefit, but the conversation really has to be on the primary benefit that like increased economic vitality brings to the town. So I just wanted to.
As opposed to a specific.
As opposed
to local receipts.
Absolutely. So as opposed to like an engine that drives increased commercial receipts in a variety of ways, and all the ways that we collect those commercial receipts, that can't be the reason for increased economic vitality. It has to be, it's important for the town for other reasons, and that's just a benefit. So I wanted to highlight that because that's contrary to a lot of the conversations that we have in this forum of saying, hey, it'd be great if we could reduce residential taxes or reduce the reliance on residential taxes because of commercial receipts. They're like, we hear you. That's great if it happens, but that's not the reason.
Okay, that's interesting. The next item is something that I just wanted to raise with everyone. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. This was mentioned at the chair's breakfast, and I also, had a separate request from our town clerk, Carrie, about participating in the December meeting. The town clerk's office is doing 4 different sessions about effective governance. The first one is on October 18th. The general description of what is expected is in the packet, in that insertion headed effective governance planner. I'm sure that's subject to change. This is an early cut at it, but that date is fixed. There will be other dates fixed for the sessions in December, January, and April. But these are important things for us to be aware of, and where we can to participate in as they're going on, or if we can't participate in that moment, the sessions will be recorded and made available. This helps us do our job as town volunteers and town committee members better. It helps us understand the larger implications of what we're doing. It helps us avoid pitfalls, inadvertent violations of open meeting law, for example. So I just wanted to pull this out of the background and make everyone aware that this process is going on, and ask that, to the extent your schedules allow, you keep an eye on these dates. We'll let you know when the dates for the sessions later in the year after October are fixed, and try to participate, because I really think it's a worthwhile exercise. A couple of years ago, at the end of the summer, there was an in-person session at the library on town governance that really was useful. Really, I went to it and I took a lot from it, and it helped a lot during the year afterward. And I've probably forgotten a lot of what I learned. So I think this is a good use of our time as individuals and as a committee. So,
Close.
Yeah.
It looks like from the description here that the finance committee is strongly encouraged to participate in the December session especially, and perhaps even lead some of the discussion on what we expect people to do when they come to us for the finance committee. Is that your read as well?
oh yeah, absolutely. Carrie has asked me to do a presentation at that meeting. So
Okay.
we've already talked about dates, and I'll come, if, depending upon what she wants, that may be a presentation that a couple of us do jointly, but it's really just being planned now. But yeah, you're absolutely right. We will be actively involved in the structuring and conduct of that particular meeting, but all of them will have value. So I just wanted to urge everybody to maintain awareness of that. So the next item on the agenda is the moment you've all been waiting for. We had asked the finance department to work with us to arrange for Hilltop Securities.
Doing the finance.
Number 7?
Yeah.
Oh, God, I'm sorry. Yeah,
One year in charge of.
I skipped my own item. I'm sorry.
Let's try. Right.
Yeah, well, I was tired of listening to my own voice. That's my little report. But there's plenty of people in this room who can correct me, because basically the whole committee is here right now. The Financial Policy Work Group has now been formally constituted. We had our first meeting, although I think a couple of us forgot to be sworn in, so I'm not sure. Oops. So we will fix that.
Yeah.
But the members of it are myself, Don, Wendy, and Ryan. And we're starting work on reviewing the financial policies for the town. We began by highlighting those portions of the existing town policies that are you had a good way of putting it at the meeting, Wendy. They're not administrative or organizational. This is operational. They're not operational. The operational portions of it are very much in the purview of the finance department. But there are portions of it, important sections of it that address issues like reserve policies, like debt. And that's where we're starting our work. So we will report back every finance committee meeting to give people an idea of where we are. And as we start to produce some actual product, we'll be bringing that to everyone here as well. Because our charge has us giving a preliminary report to the select board by the end of the year. And then a more detailed, probably final report on at least some aspects of what we're doing in time for what we are recommending to be considered and hopefully adopted before the warrant closes. So people will understand what the policy is. I think the first area that we'll focus on is reserves. So hopefully we'll have covered that by then.
And I was just one other thing to add to that too, for the meeting, town clerk's office will come up and swear the three of you in, so you don't have to worry about that either.
Okay.
Good.
Great. So that's that report. I apologize for skipping that over, because it is important. And now, does anyone have any questions about that? That is that, by the way, just as a reminder, that's an open meeting. Anyone can call in and participate, and we are going to be posting minutes. So the minutes of the meeting will be posted, shortly. So since our next meeting is Tuesday, they may not be posted before the next meeting, but they'll be posted soon. So moving on, Ryan, do you want to introduce Hilltop Securities and talk about what they're going to be presenting?
So this is following up on a request made by the finance committee. Specifically, it was working with Lois in terms of things that Lois wanted the financial advisor to come and report on. So had a discussion with our financial advisor, Hilltop Securities, and with us today is Cindy McInerney and Lisa Driscoll from Hilltop Securities, who we work with on a regular basis on a variety of debt issues. So again, I followed up with them to speed up the things that based on my conversation with Lois that the finance committee wanted to hear about today. So with that, I will pass it over to Cindy and Lisa. And you both have the floor. And so here we are.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm going to try to share my screen. Can you all see it? Did it work?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, good evening, everyone. My name's Lisa Driscoll. I'm the Senior Vice President at Hilltop Securities in the Boston office. And with me is my colleague, Cindy McNerney. She's the Regional Managing Director in the Boston office. And as Ryan said, we are the town's financial advisors. And Ryan forwarded us the list of questions that you all had. So we put together a brief presentation that'll hopefully, touch on all of these questions and answer them. Certainly, stop me if there's something that we're going over that you're unclear on. And, when we get to the end, if there are additional questions or you want to go into some of these things on more detail, we're happy to do that. Did it go? Okay, so we thought we would start with some basics regarding credit ratings. The town has historically used Moody's to rate their bonds and their notes, and the town has the highest credit rating attainable with Moody's, the AAA. This is the scale of both Moody's and Standard & Poor's ratings. So it compares a Moody's AAA, which is a capital A and 2 lowercase a's, to the Standard & Poor's AAA, which is 3 uppercase a's. And then to show distinction between categories in the AA, single A, and BAA category, Moody's uses numbers. So this is AA1. Whereas S&P would use a plus or a minus. So this is a AA plus. There are more ratings below this line, below the Baa3 and BBB minus, but those are, junk bonds or non-investment grade credits that would not have market access. There's, the market doesn't distinguish really between the Moody's AAA and the S&P AAA. Both would price the same in the market. With that being said, Moody's rates 14 communities in Massachusetts at the AAA level, whereas Standard & Poor's has between 60 and 70 AAAs in Massachusetts. So the Moody's AAA, is definitely more coveted. Most of the Massachusetts communities are in the AA category, and that's a reflection of, the wealth in Massachusetts, the strong management of the various communities, and, the fairly restrictive state laws. You can't really do much, anything too fancy without some sort of special legislation. So next, in terms of the Moody's credit rating, this is just an excerpt of their methodology framework and the factors that go into their credit rating. A Moody's rating is made up of aspects of the economy, financial performance, institutional framework, and leverage. The economy makes up 30% of Moody's rating, and that includes, resident income, which is at 10%, full value per capita makes up another 10%, and then economic growth makes up the last 10%. The next part of the rating is financial performance, and that's really the operational and financial strength of the community, and it has everything to do really with the reserve levels of the community. 20% of the financial performance score is made up of available fund balance. And, that's really an indication as to whether or not the community has the resources available to, bridge any temporary budget gaps. And then the next 10% of the financial performance is the liquidity ratio. And this is a measure of financial flexibility. So, where financial performance has everything to do with the reserves, the town's reserve position really makes up 30% of the rating. So developing and adhering to fiscal policies is really the best way to maintain reserve levels. The next piece of the rating at 10% is the institutional framework, and that's really the statutory and legal framework under which the community operates, and how revenue is raised in the community, and that has a lot to do with mechanics at the state level. And then the last 30% of Moody's rating has to do with leverage. The town or a community's capacity to invest in its capital assets and infrastructure, and then to pay the annual fixed costs associated with those. So 20% of the leverage score is the long-term liabilities ratio. And Moody's considers long-term liabilities, not only general obligation bonded debt, but they also consider unfunded pension and OPEB liabilities when they're looking at the long-term liabilities ratio. And then the last 10% of the leverage component is the fixed cost ratio. The annual financial burden to the community of the debt, the pension, the OPEB, as it relates to the revenue that the community is generating. So these are the major factors and then sub factors that go into Moody's rating. And what they do is they, develop a scorecard to sort of weigh each of these factors in how they come up with the credit rating. So you can see, and all of this information in the measure here has to do with, this is from the town's last credit rating report, which was in September 2024. And it was based on the 2023 audited financials. So you can see, hopefully, in the far right-hand column that the town scores in the AAA category in all but, 3 of these areas. In the available fund balance ratio section of financial performance, which makes up 20% of the rating, the town is scoring at the AA level. The measure is 30.3%. To get to the AAA, Moody's wants to see this measure at 35% or greater. So, being at 30.3%, the town's not terribly far off from getting this score up to AAA. The next area where the town scores in the AA category is in the institutional framework portion, and that makes up 10% of the rating. And that has to do with, how Massachusetts government is run and takes into considerations elements of Proposition 2.5. So this AA score is across the board for all Massachusetts communities that Moody's is rating. So there really isn't much to do to move this score any higher. Moody's has decided that Massachusetts, gets, for now, they get scored the AA under institutional framework, and it's going to be the same for anyone that they rate. And then finally, under the leverage category, the long-term liabilities ratio, which again makes up 20% of the score, the town is scoring in the AA at 110.6%. And Moody's wants to see the long-term liabilities ratio under 100% to get to the AAA level. The lower the ratio there, the better. So again, not too far off from the AAA level at 110% here. And it's important to note that the national median AAA for the long-term liabilities ratio is 258%. So the town is well below the national median AAA score for this portion of the scorecard. The town also has some additional notching factors that go into the scorecard, and those have to do with the high property values and high residential income levels in the town. The town gets a half notch up for its high resident income ratio and another half notch up for the full value per capita value here. So that gives it, gives the town one notch up for additional strength in local revenues here. So the resulting scorecard indicated outcome is a AAA, as well as the assigned rating is a AAA. A lot of times, even for AAA communities, we see that the scorecard indicated outcome is often a AA1 or a AA2, and then Moody's goes ahead and assigns the AAA rating, regardless of it's not all based on this scorecard and tied exactly to the metrics. The Moody's goes to committee and there's a discussion. So there's a lot more behind the scenes than just this scorecard that goes into the rating. So like I said, oftentimes we see the scorecard come out at a AA1 or AA2, and then it bumps up to the AAA. But here, the fact that the town, the scorecard comes out at a AAA itself, is a really good measure of the strength of the town's underlying AAA rating. So this is the summary page, again, from the town's most recent Moody's report from September 2024. Hopefully you all have a copy of this and have had a chance to read it. If not, we can certainly get you a copy. But we just, we wanted to include the summary page just basically to point out that everything that's going well in the town, everything that Moody's sees as a positive, the strong economy, the high property wealth and residential income levels, the strong management, your history of voter support for debt exclusions and operating overrides. What Moody's is focusing on, though, in terms of, challenges or weaknesses, is the town's reserve levels. And those could certainly be increased a little bit. One of the factors that they cite as leading to a downgrade is if there were to be a decline in reserves and liquidity, or a material increase in leverage beyond current expectations. So Moody's, considers, when they speak with the town, they ask the town what future plans are. So they, consider what, you have in your capital plan in terms of, future expectations. So that is already, built into the rating consideration. But, material increases beyond that is something that could potentially lead to a downgrade. We thought this chart was important to show, just to give some context in terms of the other Massachusetts AAA rated communities, who you're comparing yourself to. So we've highlighted the town here. Moody's has recently changed their rating methodology, probably in the last year and a half or so, in terms of how they're looking at available fund balances and that measure of financial performance. Previously, they had been focused on just the general fund and looking at sort of general fund, unassigned fund balance as a percent of revenue. And there, the idea was that a ratio between, around 20% was where the AAA level should be. They recently, like I said, revised their methodology, and that they are now looking at total governmental funds. So the available fund balance ratio is all governmental and enterprise funds. So they're really looking at the total financial resources of a community when they're evaluating reserves. So I know one of the questions was, whether or not enterprise funds were considered in the town's rating, and they are considered when, looking at reserve levels. Enterprise funds, really at this point should be self-supporting. Revenue fees should be raised to, support the activities of the enterprise. And in terms of the reserve levels of the enterprise funds, targeting 3 to 6 months of expenditures as a reserve position is really what, Moody's is expecting. So you can see again here, the 30.3% is where the town falls in terms of the reserve levels. And it's, it's important to see that, although the town is on the lower end here, there are certainly other AAA communities that are even below the 30% that the town is at now. And so it's really, the town's AAA is for the most part safeguarded by, the wealth of the tax base. Your EQV is a little over $10 billion, and these thought to, improve and strengthen your fiscal policies will certainly help to maintain the AAA rating. And one of the questions that was in what Ryan had sent us was what might hinder the AAA rating. And, Cinder and I were talking about this question, and the timeliness of audits is really sort of coming to the forefront of the rating agencies these days. The rating agencies are subject to SEC requirements regarding the timely receipt of financial information. And so when the town, issues debt, it's committing to providing the market with, ongoing disclosure, and that includes, updated financial information. So, every March, the town is filing an annual report with the most recent audited financial statements. And, to the extent the receipt of those audited, Moody's is delayed in receiving those financial statements, because of the SEC requirements, they are put in a position where they might need to start withdrawing ratings if they don't receive that information timely. So that is definitely, one of the things that could certainly hinder maintaining the AAA rating or getting a rating on an issuance of debt in general. And so a lot of the questions also had to do with the town's debt. This is a chart of the town's existing long-term debt service outstanding as of June 30, 2025. So it's a stacked bar chart that shows the principal and interest payments for these 8 categories of debt on an annual basis. So, we track the town's water debt, sewer debt, Mass Clean Water Trust debt, the electric department debt, and in terms of the general fund, we separate the debt between school non-excluded, town non-excluded, which is the yellow and this purplish bar here. So this is the debt that's inside the levy. And the school excluded and town excluded is here. School excluded being the green, the majority of the town's outstanding debt. And most of this is the new middle school project that you're financing currently. And then there's a small amount of town excluded debt as well. So you can see how the debt service, the principal and interest payments decline. They sort of level off here for a number of years, and then everything amortizes by 2053. And we took that data from the graph and just aggregated the 8 categories to show the total principal balance of outstanding as of June 30, 2025 for each of the categories, to give you a sense of the town's long-term liabilities that Moody's would be looking at when evaluating the town's credit. Again, you can see that the excluded school debt, the 93.2 million, makes up the majority of the 121 million of principal outstanding. And then, like I said, Moody's also considers the unfunded pension and OPEB liabilities as part of the town's long-term debt profile. So, it includes the 17.3 million of unfunded pension liability based on the January 2024 valuation. And that amortizes by 2031, which is, just around the corner now. And the net OPEB liability as of June 30, 2023 at about 20.8 million. And that we do know the town has established an OPEB trust, which I believe, has probably close to at least $6 million or so in it at this point. And these numbers are certainly some of the lowest for Moody's AAA rated communities. So, in terms of comparison with your peers, these unfunded pension and OPEB numbers are definitely among the lowest. And then more on the town's debt. This is a sheet that we prepare and keep track of from the town. It has a lot of data on it, but basically the main point of it is it shows the town's authorized but unissued debt. So, in the aggregate, we're tracking about $130 million of debt for authorized but unissued projects. So these are all projects that the town has gone before a town meeting and they got voted and approved. And, for example, this first one from 2016, the town authorized $16.5 million for water system improvements, and it has yet to finance 11.5 million of that. And so we keep track of all of these, the various projects that the town has approved and still has a balance to be issued, up to the most recent 27.5 million road maintenance program project that the town also voted to exclude from Proposition 2.5. We work with the town finance department to keep this, sheet updated, and it really becomes a tool to, help manage timing to meet cash flow needs for these various projects. And then in terms of this $130 million here, Moody's looks at this and considers it in their overall evaluation in terms of the prospective projects that the town might ultimately, need to finance, and that might ultimately become part of the debt profile. And so in terms of, modeling proposed debt, this is just something that we recently prepared for the town regarding that $27.5 million, road improvement program project. We prepared, various scenarios at, differing amounts, different timing of financing for the ultimately approved $27.5 million road improvement plan project. So since this project was planned to be and now is excluded from Prop 2.5, we started off by looking at the town's existing, exempt debt service, which is shown here on the left-hand side. And then we layered on the permanent financing of 5 tranches of bond issues, $6,250,000 of bonds issued for 4 years and a final $2.5 million bond issued in 2029 to estimate the aggregate debt service of financing all of that. And then we took a look at, the tax impact per $100,000 of assessed value, and also the impact on the average single family home. And then we also looked at, the proposed $27.5 million of debt service, plus the existing debt service to get, the overall impact of the existing debt service plus the new debt service, what the impact to the taxpayer might look like to finance everything, the total impact of existing and new. And you can see up here that this model had 7 pages of backup that supported all of these various debt structures, but we're just showing the summary page here to give you a sense of how we modeled that. And this is something that Moody's certainly likes to see. They might ask to see if there's a much larger project to know that the town is looking at how the financing of the items in the capital plan might roll out and impact the taxpayers and what it all looks like. So that is all that we had prepared for a presentation, and we're happy to go into more detail or answer any additional questions that you all might have.
Yeah, all right. I think, thank you. That was very responsive to what we asked you for, and is an enormous amount of really good information. So thank you for that. We'll get copies of this presentation, I hope.
Yeah, we can send it to Ryan.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. It really very, very helpful. All right, I'm going to open it up to questions from the committee. Why don't we start going around the room that way? And then we'll go around the room this way, and then we'll go to people on the screen. So Don, do you want to start?
Yeah, Lisa, thank you very much. That was really helpful. The first question I have is with the 159.6 million, I guess, of our current liabilities, 121 million of that is bonded liability. Our debt service this year is about 11, almost 12% of the general fund. Is that a variable that we need to keep an eye on? Is that something that Moody's also looks at in the ratings equation? And second to that is, if we were to issue the authorized put on issue debt, which I'm looking at that list and thinking it's all actually planned and in the works, our debt service rose to say 24 or 25% of the general fund, what would the reaction be? Thanks.
So the first part of your question, Moody's considers the certain the water, sewer, the trust debt, the electric debt, is self-supporting. So that's sort of looked at separately. And I know the town has a pretty aggressive policy in terms of financing the general fund non-excluded debt, the way it amortizes the principal there and, pays off, I believe it's 60% in 5 years and all of it at year 10. And so Moody's certainly considers that in their, when they evaluate the debt score. But in terms of, bringing on the 130 million, I don't, that wouldn't be something that the town does in one fell swoop. I would think it would certainly be, layered in and managed. And to the extent that the town, develops a plan on how to do that, Moody's would have to, evaluate that and see how it impacts the rating. I mean, one of their concerns was an increase in the leverage, an increase in debt, beyond the current expectations. And they did note that, the leverage is expected to increase with the new middle school project. So it is possible that, bringing on all of that could have an impact on the rating. Cinder, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, when I think Lisa's right with regard to anything that's self-supporting is looked at a little bit differently. Look at, you got 50 million on that sheet that showed the authorizations, authorized unissued debt. 50 million of the authorized unissued debt is for, I can't read the name of it, the pond improvements in the PFAS mitigation. So our assumption is that that might go through the
There's a lot of
trust.
electric on here, water and sewer. So not all of the 130 million is
10 million
general
more
fund.
is light plant, so that's self-supporting, so they wouldn't look at that. I mean, they really want to, some of their metrics are based on the general fund because they're looking at the budget and how much the tax supported debt as a percent of the total budget, what that is. Once you get above 10% in that one particular category, I think you need to be careful. Like Lisa said, if you're amortizing the principal quickly, you get some kudos for that. But at the same time, if you establish a range and then you stay within the range as a policy, then you establish your credibility too in that regard. And so, for example, if interest rates are really low, like they were a couple of years ago, and you want to accelerate $100 million for your school project because you want to take advantage of rates, then there's obviously good reason for that. Plus, that was debt excluded, and a lot of your larger projects, capital projects, are debt excluded and or have been debt excluded, and or you've got a history of approving operating overrides as well. So you've got a really strong history and of doing what you want and paying for it, and your wealth of your tax base really carries you a long way. So
Looking closer at this authorized unissued, I mean, the majority is either, self-supporting or debt excluded. Hopefully, some of this PFAS mitigation can go through the trust. The 27.5 million for roads is debt excluded. So not very much of it is, general fund town type debt that would,
we pay it all out of the general fund, whether it's excluded or not. That the exclusion has more to do with our headway to the Proposition 2.5 levy limit, but it's still paid by taxes, but I guess your point is that the debt that's supporting an enterprise fund activity shouldn't be being paid by taxes. There should be a transfer from the enterprise fund into the general fund budget to cover that. Is that how that works, Ryan?
Well, I mean, generally, any of the debt services that is associated with any of the enterprise funds is paid by the enterprise.
Yeah, it's part of that's how they figure out the rates.
Well, it's in the general fund, it's in the budget. We'll have to.
It's a general obligation.
Completely financially separate. They are their own funds.
Well, I understand that, but okay, well, it shows up in the budget that we vote on.
Yeah, as I understand it,
Well,
somebody,
Well,
correctly, it's a general obligation of the town.
Correct.
But it's paid by the enterprise fund. Is that the right way to characterize it?
Okay, well, okay, then I should restate that and say the interest and debt service that is paid for out of the general fund is running about 12% of the budget today. So maybe that's a net of the enterprise fund debt.
I think, yes, the enterprise fund, it's accounted for in the enterprise fund, even if you've issued general obligation debt
So
to
that's a net number.
pay for it.
Makes sense. Yep,
Okay.
thanks.
Well, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I just have a short question, just so that we talk about it all the time, about free cash and how it's looked at in comparison to reserves and general fund balance. is it included in those balances that are considered reserve and general fund? So that we know that it counts as that asset when we're being graded?
Yeah, the free cash becomes part of the general fund balance and is considered in the reserve ratios.
Okay.
The rating agencies generally want to look at your audits. They don't really rely just on Massachusetts accounting system accounting system, which is free cash and stabilization funds. All the free cash and stabilization funds are included in the unassigned fund balance on the GAAP audits. And that way they can, if they rely on GAAP, generally accepted accounting principle audits, they can compare you not only with everyone else in Massachusetts who has audits, but also nationally, which is what they're doing when they look at your credit. So we're primarily, when we look at reserve positions and the reserve information that Lisa gave you that compares with other AAAs rated by Moody's, that's all coming out of the GAAP accounting, GAAP audits. And it's
That's
dated
great.
some.
That's great information. It solves a conversation that we've had multiple times, so I appreciate it. Thank you, and thanks for the information.
Jerry?
Sure.
Yeah, some time ago on the pension and the OPEB liabilities. The last time I looked at this, I was on the Town of Weston committee. And when we did the analysis, we saw that there were a lot of towns in Massachusetts who were totally underwater.
Wow.
They could not make this payment. And there was talk at that point from our advisors that the legislature was going to change the rules. Has there been any talk of that? Has there been any updates on that? Because they were going to change the rules because there were just so many towns that if they had to fund their pension liabilities, they'd go bankrupt.
Yeah, I think I've heard the same thing.
Yeah.
So, and I think those schedules have been adjusted in the past.
Okay.
And they could be adjusted again. The town specifically as it relates to the retirement liability, I think we're looking at the last audit. I think we're about 90% funded, so we're in good shape with that.
Right.
But yeah, other communities are facing that when you're limited by Proposition 2.5 and doing that every year, and then putting in your retirement liabilities, which there's a variety of different circumstances throughout the Commonwealth from different pension systems.
Right.
And then you throw OPEB on it. Yeah, it's a concern for some communities because they just don't have the additional resources to put to it.
Yeah, well, when we were discussing it, we were saying, we set up a reserve fund in case we had to pay it. But at the same time, we looked at it and said, if the legislature changes the rules, we don't actually need all those reserves.
Right. But then even still, you'd want, in an ideal world, you'd still want to be saving, still be putting money into your OPEB and retirement reserves. But because counting on the legislature to change it, yes, you could, but it isn't certainly a given that would happen in this case. So.
All right, thank you.
Let's start with Carlin and go down this side of the room.
Lisa, I think you mentioned in one of your sheets that there was an excluded debt for the schools. This is under the existing long-term debt for Concord. The school excluded debt was $93 million. My understanding of the middle school building committee's budget is that budget total amount is $114 million. And right now it looks like they're going to be running about a $6 or $7 million under budget. They're at about 104 million, sorry. How are you timing that? Where are you getting the $93 million figure? What date is that? Because that's changing as they complete the middle school and then doing the phase 1, phase 2 with the irrigation field.
It's a matter of timing of when the rest of the debt is issued, because I know there's going to be more debt issued in November.
Exactly. So the town issued a portion, about close to 12 million in June 2022, close to 50 million in June 2023, about 35 million in September 2024. And so of the initial $102 million that was authorized, there's about 5.8 million left to borrow. And then there's the 7.2 million additional authorization that has yet to be financed.
Thank you.
No questions? Any questions, Brian or John?
I had a question, and I apologize if you already addressed it, Lisa, but when is the next Moody's assessment on the town? I think you mentioned that the last was based on 2023 fiscal year. When would, and I guess they rated some geo bonds in September of 24. When do we expect them to do a ratings review of Concord?
Sure. So the current plan is to issue more debt, before the end of the calendar year in October, November timeframe. So, once we have all of the details of the borrowing established, we would reach out to Moody's to set up a rating call then. So it'll likely be, sometime this fall, the town would be speaking to Moody's again.
And they do a full review every time we issue?
It depends on the availability of audited financials in terms of what kind of a report they publish. But this time, it would be a full review.
Okay, and can you speak to the trends of ratings across Massachusetts? Because I think Concord is, not the only town that has had large capital projects. Have we seen a downtrend at all across Massachusetts, an uptrend? Anything notable?
I mean, I think, we've been seeing pressure on the ratings of a lot of communities. We've seen a few recent downgrades, some, negative outlooks put on credit ratings. There's definitely pressures out there, and it's the communities that have the strong reserve positions and the good policies in place that'll weather through that. Cinder, I'm sure you have more to add there.
We're seeing a lot of debt authorizations, big ones too, big school construction projects, some in like $500 million. We're seeing a lot of public safety projects, facilities and police stations, libraries. We're seeing a lot. It's been an uptick for sure and surprising. But most of the large projects are all debt excluded, regardless of the, except for some of the cities really do not want to do debt exclusion. So they're potentially holding back to some extent, but we're seeing a lot of debt authorizations.
And I guess last question on that, just round of the full review that'll come. Do we have any does the advisors have any expectations of any changes? We're in a good position. Is there any, do you have a prediction?
Yeah, we do have a prediction. We think your AAA is solid right now, but as you look at the policy that you're developing with regard to the reserve position of the town going forward, you might want to look at a range and see if you can beef up the reserve position a little bit to accommodate what's going on, in terms of the scrutiny with regard to reserves. There is a scrutiny with regard to reserves because there is a lot of debt that's being issued, not just by not by Concord so much, but by communities going forward. There's a lot of debt that's either needed or planned. And so there is a lot of more focus on whether or not the cities and towns have the flexibility to weather any kind of storm that might come. So been a lot of uncertainty about everything. And so the more that you can be positioned to deal with anything. I mean, you do a lot of things already. You've got 10-year capital plan, you've got 10-year forecast. So you are planning ahead and you're planning your debt, you're planning your policies, you're doing everything right. But your reserve, if you look at the credit report that is part of what Lisa's presentation has in it, you'll see that there's a lot of mention about the challenge that the rating agency sees is, the reserves could be a little bit higher as compared to the rest of the AAAs that they rate. There's always the option for the town to consider Standard & Poor's. For a little while, it seemed like you could get AAAs easier there. And like Lisa said originally, they sell the same as Moody's AAAs. But, you've got a nice solid AAA with Moody's, but you could, they're not allowed to give advice, but if you read their credit report, they kind of tell you what they're thinking you might want to consider doing. So we're generally saying the same thing they're saying, because we're so familiar with how they look at things, but the wealth of your base kind of let you get away with it. And the same thing with the other AAAs around the rest of the country. If Massachusetts is very wealthy compared with the rest of the country. Around the country, there's much higher levels of reserves that are expected and that are actually traditionally maintained. So, here with property taxes, with the reliance on property taxes and the wealth of tax bases here in Massachusetts, we've all gotten away with lesser percent reserves, but once you are being compared with your peers, so you want to make sure you stay in the middle of the AAA range, not in terms of reserve position, not with the 3 or 4 of the 15 that are at the below the rest.
Thank you.
Yep.
John, anything else going online? Anybody have a question? No raised hands?
I have a question.
Eric? Oh, and Peg. Okay, we'll start with Eric.
Thanks for the presentation. Very, very informative. I caught a headline earlier this year from our neighbor Bedford that they have historically maintained a AAA bond rating under S&P. They were caught, the way the press was written, they were caught off guard by an unexpected change in the metrics that S&P uses. They unexpectedly instituted a debt per capita metric and went so far as to essentially issue a warning to Bedford that their AAA rating was in jeopardy because of this new metric. So 2 questions on that. One, does Moody's ever do that? Do they ever kind of surprise municipalities and change the metrics mid-stride? And 2, is there a possibility that Moody's will move to a metric like this debt per capita metric?
So when Moody's did revise their methodology, they did notify several communities that because of the change, it looks like, or we'll be reviewing your credit again because it could potentially get downgraded because of this change. So if they have done that in the past. The town, was not on that list, was not notified that the change in methodology could have an impact on their rating. In terms of that specific metric, you said it was, I'm not sure. Moody's looks at full value per capita, and I'm sure they consider debt per capita. I mean, it's a metric, but I haven't heard that anything like that. I don't know. I don't work with Bedford. I don't know the specifics of that. Do you know anything about that, Senator?
I think what they did was, I think they've always looked at debt per capita, both rating agencies, and they've always looked at how quickly you amortize the debt and the percent that debt is of the budget. But I think what they did was they increased the weighting of debt midstream and to match the other rating agency. They've changed the methodology, but they also increased how much they weight the debt. It used to be 10%, now it's 20, plus they've got the other. They've also decided with the debt that they're going to include unfunded pension liability and unfunded OPEB liability along with outstanding bonded general obligation debt. So they redo their methodology every whenever they feel like it. And they've all kind of done it. Fitch rating agency, which isn't used very much in Massachusetts, they've done it also. So in the last 2 or 3 years, they've all redone their methodologies. And I think one of the things is that they do have a more of a concern than they ever did before about how much debt is being issued. But that's why I think they want to see management is a big part of their criteria. So if there's fiscal policies and there's standards and ranges and you stay within it and you've established credibility with the way you operate, that's really good. That's why what Lisa said about 24, like the 24 audit's not available right now. We work with probably 50 communities that are held up on getting the 24 audit. And there's a lot of scrutiny with regard to, like Lisa said, the SEC wants to make sure that when the rating agencies give out a rating that they're dealing with current information and if they really rely on audits. So if they don't have a timely audit, and if, right now that we're worried that the rating agencies, if they don't have a timely audit, will refuse to rate the debt. I mean, Concord could issue non-rated debt, but you would pay a higher price for that.
Also, Peggy has her hand up.
Peggy?
Yes, there was one slide, that identified, looked like a AAA debt compared to fund balance. And it was a slide that I was just curious if there was a way to identify the actual dollar amount that we would have to add to our fund balance in order to get from AA to AAA. It was one of your tables, yeah.
One of the things about it, I think Lisa's going to answer, but with your 24 audit will show something, I think, in a major improvement over the 23 audit. It looks like that from the disclosure information. So you might be at a higher percentage now. A lot of these numbers could be based on 24 audits. Is that right, Lisa?
Well, is there a dollar amount?
I mean, we could look at, it's a specific calculation that Moody's has. There's things that they add in and take away. It's not, simple inputs, but we could try to come up with something.
Okay.
I think you're 24. Do you all know? I mean, I think you're 24 fund balance and unassigned fund balance under GAAP, which isn't available yet, but it looks like it's estimated that it will have, you had a surplus in 24. Your operating revenues over your expenditures. It looks like you had a surplus. Is that correct?
Yeah, added to free cash. Yes, we did.
Yeah,
free
so you
cash
could
went
be
up.
there in 24.
You might be there already, but without the audit, we can't know, and we can't come up with the same comparison with Massachusetts system of accounting.
Okay, well,
So what you need to do
I
is
don't
to
know if
look
other
and
people
develop.
noticed there was like a line that said AAA and AA. We were short, and the question was, what's the difference? And how can we get there? And then the other question I have, which is really kind of cuts to the chase a bit, is what is the difference for ratings on reserves versus is free cash count for reserves, which is what we've done in the past, just free cash, and how do those compare? Does it count?
Yes, free cash on a GAAP basis is part of unassigned fund balance.
Okay.
Free cash and stabilization count a lot. And what the finance committee might want to consider is understanding your audit and what that is showing for reserves and what you've got for reserves under Massachusetts system of accounting as you develop the policy that you want to have going forward with regard to free cash and stabilization. And then also with regard to unreserved and total fund balance under GAAP. I think a lot of communities are trying to do both, look at both ways of accounting.
What does free cash
Yeah.
under
Massachusetts.
quote, yeah, is free cash the same as stabilization funds?
No, they're different. No, and free cash plus stabilization is approximately equal to unassigned fund balance under GAAP, but not totally. Usually unassigned fund balance is a much larger number
Okay.
because it accrues, it allows for accruals. Massachusetts system doesn't.
Okay.
Don, one second.
Yeah, what about the retained earnings of enterprise funds? Do they count as reserves?
Yes. And that, like Lisa said already, sorry, is that the rating agency is now looking at both the general fund and total governmental funds. And when they look at total governmental funds, they're looking at the enterprise activities. And if the reserves are large or adequate or appropriate in the enterprise funds, then when they do the metric that was just asked about, they're looking at the available fund balance ratio of all governmental and enterprise funds. That's what that heading is there. Then they're giving credit for the fact that your enterprise funds are strong also, not just the general fund. So they're looking at the general fund and they're looking at all funds. So
Right.
you need to have for the enterprise funds, like Lisa said, probably about 3 to 6 months of operating expense in reserve.
Yep.
And that could be another policy that you develop.
Thanks.
So I think we're getting some items that we want to follow up on as a committee. We'll want to see the audit when it's done, which, do we have a target date for that?
So we've been in conversation, Karen was able to have a conversation with our auditor, and where we are. So the hope is it would be at the end of next month. It'll be at
All
124.
right, so the end of September,
Correct.
we're hoping to have the audit, the 24 audit finalized,
Mhm.
which is the gating factor to going to market on the next tranche of borrowing for the
That's
middle
right.
school. Which,
Correct.
and that audit will have some information that will be very valuable to the financial policy working group as it thinks about reserves. Because what we just learned, and thank you for that, is that in our work, when we consider setting policies on reserves, we need to think about how those reserves are viewed for these other purposes. And that will help guide us when we start thinking about percentages and frameworks for setting aside money. So this is really helpful
Yeah.
for both the finance committee and for the financial policy working group. So
I'll just comment, the,
Wendy, come to the microphone. So Wendy Ravelli, who's a member of our select board.
I don't know what microphones are. I just want to comment, as a result of an audit a couple of years ago, the light plant put together a very elaborate documentation of all their reserves because they have about 10 different funds. Many of them are restricted, but I'm going to call it the unrestricted fund balance for the light plant was very large many years ago. And the concern there is that the ratepayers, you're increasing rates, but you know what, you're collecting too much money. So it goes both ways. But I think they have documented the policy with like 3 to 6 months of their reserves. But I don't know where it stands right now. But that's one of the audits that's being done end of September also. So you'll hear more.
I heard at a meeting a couple months ago, $16 million in reserves,
Well, you have to be.
in retained earnings.
Well, but let's,
Yeah.
what we've just identified is that we need to get that information in a granular way, understand it. So we've got a to-do item that we need to follow up on. For finance and for the policy work group.
There's another committee, the Finance Audit Advisory Committee, that will be looking at just these audits, the town's audits, the school's audits, and the light plants audits. And I don't know the timing of that next meeting. I don't think it's been set yet.
Wendy is the super
Waiting.
liaison.
Score.
We had something to receive.
Right, got it.
Wendy and I had been in touch.
We have the right person here, because I'm pretty, you're the,
I'm the chair.
you're the chair, yeah, so we've got the right group in the room. If there are no more questions, are there any questions from the public before we let Hilltop Securities go? Seeing none, thank you very much. This was very responsive to what we'd asked for and is really going to help us and guide our work. So we really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Nice to see you all.
Nice to see
Good night. Thank you.
So we are going to move on. And actually, we're on schedule. A miracle. All right. The next item on our agenda is an important item that's going to lead us to a decision point tonight. And that is, we're going to, I don't know how formally we want to do this. In the old days, we used to adjourn the finance committee meeting, start the guidelines committee meeting, and then adjourn that and take a vote as finance committee. We can do that, or we can just let Don start his presentation, which I'm inclined to do. So, because that's how we did it last year, and it seemed to work out. So I'm going to ask Don as the chair of the guidelines committee to present to us the slides that were in your packet on developing the metrics for this year. And just, Don will get into it, but just, we should all keep in mind, these are not the guidelines. This is just the top-down overview to try and give us some guardrails around our thinking about where the guidelines may end up when we do those after we have gotten some input from the budgeting entities over the next couple of months. So.
Yeah, thank you, Lois, for that background intro. I'll just mention there are a couple of very minor change tweaks in a couple of the slides here, so I'll try to point that out if it's different from what you have in your packet. And but tonight, as Lois said, tonight we're here to talk about the guidelines and the metrics for the guidelines. Oh, I see. I need to be. I'm on the same page as you, but I need to be in the presentation. Sorry about that.
Not sharing me down.
Okay. That.
I think behind What is not an inaccurate representation? I'm still.
Okay, there we go. Now, all right, so we're gonna hopefully simplify the mystery of what I always thought was a mysterious thing anyway, of the metrics. And we're gonna recap a little bit about 26 and even taking a step back to 25. And then before we come forward to 27, and then a couple of slides in the appendix that I'm going to touch on. So we'd always think about the balanced budget, right? And the expenses and the income have to be in sync. And there's actually another thing that has to be in balance here. And that really is the taxpayers' income growth and the town's expenses that with the inflation, rate of inflation that the town is subject to. So the metrics really are about figuring out that piece of it, about the growth of the taxpayers' income and the growth in the expenses of a level services budget. And just like everything in economics, it's a model, right? It's not real world. We use 4 specific data points that are forecast for this purpose by the Congressional Budget Office. One of them is the real personal income growth. That is, say, real meaning net of inflation. The nominal income growth, includes inflation. That's the top line. And the difference really is real equals nominal minus the inflation, if you think of it that way. I think I do want to pause on that for a moment to say it's possible for the real income growth to be a negative number. If we have a time when inflation is bigger than the growth of income, the real growth of the taxpayers' income is a negative number, meaning they start out knowing there has to be a cut somewhere in order to maintain a lifestyle. On the town side, the cost of services side, about 80% of the town's budgeted wages, and about 20% are goods and services. So the metrics that are available from the Congressional Budget Office that are most relevant to those two are the Employment Cost Index, the ECI, reflects the wages side, and the Chained Consumer Price Index of all urban areas is the metric we use for the goods and services. Does anybody have any question? I don't want to,
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the wages, is that inclusive of benefits and retirement as well? So is it wage adjacent items that are included in that?
I don't know for sure, Ryan. I think it probably is the employment cost index.
I think it does. I
The
think
80%,
it's
yeah.
cost, I think it covers the true cost of employment, which is including all the adjacent, as you said.
Okay, great. Okay.
Thanks.
Donna,
Yes.
how often do we look to see if that 80-20 split is still accurate?
Lindsay put this formula together a couple of years ago. And I don't know if we've gone back to check to see that. I think that's a good question, though. Oh, I should also say, this is only used for the spending that's subject to guidelines. So a little over half of the total town spending is subject to guidelines. The rest of it is not, because it's considered to be sort of out of the control of management. That, for example, the cost of health insurance, there's nothing that any manager could do to bring down that number. Really, I think that there's always a assumption of good management going into the negotiation there, but it is still the cost outside of this, and the cost of interest and debt service is outside of guidelines. Okay, so I took a look back in the Middle Ages when I joined the committee. The guidelines were based on the trailing data. They were just based on where were we? What was inflation last year? But we're trying to do here is forecast for spending that starts almost a year from now and runs almost 2 years from now, looking forward looking. And I believe, Lindsay, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that you invented this model of looking at the Congressional Budget Office forecasts because they actually are projecting ahead all of these metrics on a month-by-month basis for years ahead. And I thought, gee, since we started using these for fiscal year 25, we now have actual data to compare to the metrics that we use, so we can see how accurate were these things. And you can see, so the actual metric is under the projection line there, and then the variance ranges from the actual came in 11% below to the actual coming in 27% above. And in a very simple mathematical average of all of those is 4%. And I'm pretty impressed with that. I want to say to be able to look forward 2 years and come up with a projection that wound up on average being off by just 4% is very, very good. So we can feel good about the CBO forecast data as a place for us to begin our metric search. This slide should look familiar to everyone. You've seen it many times, including in our last meeting. There's one little change from last meeting. Eric pointed out after the meeting to me that I had the wrong final guidelines. We had actually retweaked the guidelines numbers, so this is corrected for that. But I do want to spend a little bit more time on it today because I want to use this slide to sort of illustrate where we're, a little more clearly how this works. So those first two bars are the real personal income growth and the nominal personal income growth. And the delta between them is inflation. So this is saying and we're looking at our fiscal year 26, which is now where we are. Our metrics were expecting 2% inflation, 1.37 real personal income growth, and 3.36 of nominal income growth. Oh, and by the way, I did double check, and that nominal income growth and real income growth is inclusive of investment income. It's not just wages, it's everything. So, okay, so 3.36, we thought the capacity would of the average, citizen would increase by 3.36%. And our formula, the 80% employment cost index plus 20% of the CPI resulted in a 3.22% cost increase. So we said cost of level services 3.22, ability to pay 3.36. Where are the guidelines going to fall? And we had some good, healthy debate about it. And I think at this stage also, we took into consideration there's a lot of additional costs coming to the taxpayer through the debt service for the middle school and the increase in some of the non-controllable costs. So we wound up with guidelines that are below 3.22 for the most part. The high school is above it. But by and large, we were bringing in a number that was less than that expected inflation cost. Now, once we have spending subject to guidelines at these numbers and all the budgeting entities hit the numbers that we gave them, what happened? Our actual spending increase as a town was 5.14%. And that translated into a tax rate increase after considering every other source of income of 4%. So a 4% rise in the tax rate from a basically 2.5% guideline. And this is, I think, the most important thing on this slide, this red line. 4% is higher than the nominal income growth. So that means that in this fiscal year, the town is taking a bigger slice of the income of our citizens. And in a way, you can say, well, there's a little bit of a buffer because if overall income went up that much, but inflation is only 2%, there is some growth for other, if other things come in other words, there's something, prices only rose to 2% of inflation, the household has a little bit of room. But we want to keep in mind what happens in a year where real personal income is a negative number. And then that correlation between the tax rate increase and the nominal income is really critical. Okay. There's one more thing on this slide. It's highlighted in the footnotes down below, and it's a date, July 2024. So 1 year ago, we sat in this room. I guess Lindsay, you were doing the talking, and you were presenting these numbers, and they had been prepared by the CBO just 1 month before. Their forecast was issued in the middle of the year, July. And so it was really, really hot off the press, really relevant. And keep that in mind as we move forward here. Okay, so if we use those same metrics for 2027, this is where we would land. We would have the inflation metric would be 2.96. Personal income growth will be 3.69 nominal, 1.66 real. And here's the side by side of, on the left side, fiscal year 2026, the right side 27. Income growth 0.3 faster. Cost growth 0.25 point slower. So it actually sets us up pretty nicely. And I was feeling really good about it for about a minute. And then I looked at the footnotes, right? And I looked at the data. I knew this CBO forecast was prepared last December. And CBO hasn't issued a mid-year update. And what's happened since last December? Tariffs, right? So it's kind of anyone's guess right now where these things land. So I went looking to see, there are other sources. Does anybody have a more recent forecast that would be pretty good? The CBO compares themselves to 3 other entities. So I thought, okay, great, I'll look at those 3 entities and see how they are. The first one is the administration. The White House puts out their own forecasts. We were able to rule that one out pretty quickly. Next is the Blue Chip Consensus by Walter Kluwer's, which has a good accuracy, but they won't let us use it unless we pay them a lot of money. So we're not going to do that either. And then there's the Federal Reserve's survey of professional forecasters. This is when they talk about the consensus out there, this is where it comes from. It's a good forecast. And in the appendix, there actually is a model that's based on it, but it's not apples to apples. They're not looking at the really defined, the way that the CBO metrics are really dialed into us. They're really much more focused on unemployment rate and GDP and things of that nature. So I had to rule that out. And that brings us to this recommendation that we should use the latest available CBO forecast. And at the moment, that would be the bars on the right. But we do need to keep in mind that tariffs are a wild card, and tariffs have the ability to turn that real income into a negative number. And I'm going to show you why I say that in a minute. The CBO may update portions of their model. They said before the end of the quarter, sometime in September. If they do, I'll update these metrics. But for the moment, this is what we're working with. As I say, it gives us a little more headroom than usual, but we have to be mindful as we're going through this process that these things are a little bit rosy because they're pre-tariff. Now, these charts are taken from the FRED site, which is the Federal Reserve's wonderful data site of all sorts of real-time measures. And I have one slide for each of our 4 data points, okay? The top chart is a 12-month, trailing 12-month, and the bottom one is the last 5 years. And so I think this is going to be important. So the first piece here, we're looking at real personal income, and for the Federal Reserve, we're able to use real disposable income, which means after taxes, and that's even better, right? So real disposable income, the trailing 12-month change is 1.09%. The 27 CBO forecast is 1.66, so it would call for quite an acceleration of this to hit it. And you can see the last 2 months have been negative. Those that's in the red circle, it's coming down. And the bottom chart showing the last 5 years of this, it's the compound annual growth rate of real personal income is 1/4 of 1%. So I don't feel really great telling you that, yeah, we can count on 1.66 of real personal income growth. Next one, disposable. So again, after taxes, personal income per capita. This is the nominal personal income growth number. It's looking great, 3.84. So before the effective inflation, income is growing nicely. It's really inflation that's caused those numbers to go negative, to turn downward on the prior chart. And our 5-year CAGR of nominal personal income, 5.1%. Fantastic. In fact, that's the CAGR of our taxes as a town. So our taxes have not grown faster than the rate of personal income growth since 2020. But they've grown as fast as it would. But that said, that's where we are. The next one is the employment cost index. And that doesn't look terrible. The last, think about it, it actually takes time for inflation to work its way through into wages. But for the trailing 12 months, it's 3.56%. We were, for the 26 metric, we have 3.4, and for the 27 forecast, it's at 3.2. So for us to hit that over the next year, that would have to slow down. Employment wage growth would have to slow. And it's certainly against that 5-year compound rate of 4.27. It's about a point below it. And finally, this is save the best for last, or the worst for last. The CPI metric. So for both the current fiscal year and for 27, the CBO forecast for this is 2%. For the trailing 12 months, it's 2.5. But look what's happened in the last 6 months. You can see it was almost nearly a flat line for the first 6 months. And now it's taken off at a 4.3% rate over these last 6 months, if you annualized that. And that's actually consistent with the last 5-year compound growth rate for this metric. And this is the one that's 20% of the town's cost, but it's the one that makes all the difference between positive and negative real income growth for the community. I don't think that I can remember a year where we've had negative real income growth as a community, but it is something we have to anticipate as a real possibility this year for 27. And we'll have to keep that in mind as we're setting our guidelines. There were 4 more slides in the packet, but those are just rejected things. As I said to a couple of folks I was sharing these with along the way, I couldn't do all of that work of coming up with something else and not at least put it in the packet, just out of my own, make me feel better. But I don't recommend them. I think this is where we have to land. I ran through this pretty fast, and I don't know the level of comfort of everyone in the group. But so please, let me know if you want me to go back to something or you want to talk about something, and I hope that we get a good conversation going.
So let's start with Pat, and then we'll go to Carlin.
That last chart with the last 6 months,
Yeah,
that one. Do you think that 4.3% includes a portion of the tariff increases?
I think it does include a small portion of it. I know that there are a lot of aspects that haven't hit yet.
So that number could be higher.
Yeah, I was reading in the Wall Street Journal that they had a good article in it. And they said that a lot of manufacturers and importers are eating a lot of the tariff costs right now. Because they don't want to lose customers, but over time, they will gradually just keep adding to their prices so that the impact of the tariffs is sort of spread out over a much longer period of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do managerial accounting for a living, and I work with a lot of small businesses revenue less than $50 million. But that is absolutely the discussions happening with a lot of businesses that qualify into that of like when do we stop eating it and when do we pass it on? That's like the number one conversation. How do we organize ourselves so that, you know, there's a little bit less of a limit, but there's like their business is structured on import export, so they have to deal with it. So like it is an absolute real discussion, and it also will affect employment as well. It's not just on CPI. So
Carmen.
Don, you said that the Congressional Budget Office estimate will come out in the third quarter of 2025. Doesn't that end September, which is next week? And if I'm assuming that it does end September, how soon after that do you think we'll have that revised metric? And will it be in time for us to set our guidelines in October?
And
What's the
Carlin,
time?
I don't know when it'll happen. They haven't committed to anything, and I imagine they're wrestling with this very issue. I think that they've said they're not going to update the personal income numbers, but I'm hoping that they update the inflation side of things.
I was gonna say something snarky, but I will not. Are there any other comments in the room? Should we go to the?
John?
Oh, John,
Sorry, I thought we were going around.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
I love having more data than less. I think it's really great to look at. There's a lot to unpack here, which we're all gonna get to over the months, so I won't belabor the point. My main concern about using these metrics is what we're applying it to, whether the base that the town provides us of quote unquote level services is truly level services. And as a committee, I don't think we've ever really asked that question. Otherwise, we're applying changes to what could be not the most optimal budget. We know there are a lot of extra expenses from the P cards to the liberal take-home policy of cars to excess HR staff, when we could go down the list. So my concern is that while this very methodical, are we applying it to an incorrect starting point? And I'm not sure how we go after that, but there's a lot of concern in this town that that starting point isn't correct. And I would hate to apply whatever to that delegate.
I think, I understand what you're saying. I think that's something to keep in mind, and those are the questions to ask when we're getting the data from the town. This doesn't,
That's why I said I didn't want to back it out. I was just making like.
No, go right ahead. And I think that's a note that we'll take, and it's something that these are questions that we'll ask as we start to get the presentations. I think this is not, it's sort of neutral on that question. Because this number isn't being applied to the budget to determine what the tax impact is. That's later in the process. This is just the guardrails.
True, but in the past, we've used the guardrails and applied it to a number without looking at that number. So I'm just prefacing the point that this, using the guardrails, which I think Lindsay started, and it's admirable because it really helps shape discussions. It's great, and I was trying to not speak this long, but applying it to what is inaccurate is not great.
Right.
And so we just have to, the whole garbage in, garbage out thing, just gotta be a little bit careful as we move forward. And,
Yeah, I think we're gonna have town budget presented to us in
I think we were hoping.
In October?
Yeah, in October. I think.
October.
We're gonna have both, and the current schedule now, subject to checking with the budgeting entities, is that there will be a town presentation on, not on the budget, but on other aspects. But not on the operating budget. In September, but both the town and the schools will be presenting to us on their operating budgets at the first meeting in October. So, this is. The questions you're raising are questions that it is absolutely appropriate to raise. And I think we're not at that point in the process yet, because nobody's telling us what they think a level services budget would cost, and this model doesn't make any assumptions about the costs. It's talking about external factors and sort of macro factors. So I hear you, but I don't think that that necessarily should affect our discussion about metrics.
I would add to that and say, give it some thought about how could we be more effective in that way. I can think of an example. We found out this past year that because spending subject to guidelines is tight, that we've been borrowing the cost of road maintenance for a long time. In fact, there's about $14 million of town debt that's subject to guidelines that has gone into road maintenance. So that's one reason, one benefit of our recent passing of the bill. We take that cost and move it out of the guidelines, out of the levy limit subject. But that said, I didn't realize we were doing that all along, right? And so I think what gets, with this saying, what gets measured gets done. Guidelines are a measure. And look, there's been the rational reaction to that, which is to try to create new enterprise funds, to create, borrow to do this. And that's made me think, well, maybe we need to be measuring some more things. Maybe not just this, but we may need a metric for the town debt, that sort of thing. And maybe give some thought, maybe there's some other metrics or some other way that we can provide input on this.
I don't think metrics are too good at data. You're using the metrics against our budget. So I would just do a zero-based budget if I was select board and really concerned about this. Okay, the town and go through the line items, but again, we're going way off track here. I just want to get there.
Yeah.
But I would allow the town in charge of a zero-based budget.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that may or may not should be. May or may not be in there. That would impact what our guidelines are against.
Right.
I mean, I don't think there's been a zero-based budget probably ever done.
So I'm gonna go to online. Anybody have any comments, questions? Issues, suggestions? I can't see any raised hands. Anybody else looking at the full screen? And Lindsay, even you? We keep referencing you.
It wasn't me who came up with this approach, it was Parashar, but thanks for the kudos.
Champion.
I have a comment. So I shared this comment with Don already, and I do appreciate the amount of effort and time that, whether it was you, Lindsay, or not, you definitely had an iteration in it, and Don, the work that you've done on it as well. But I would like to say that even if it's like outdated information that we're trying to use, that using that same data set is probably important, so that we're not jumping between data sets like every year and trying to re-establish what our methodology is, because that would require a lot of like understanding of whether we're hitting the mark or not. And I think it's more of a risk than, putting that caveat in our minds when we're discussing whether someone really needs to meet their guidelines or not. Like that's the discussion that we can like kind of revisit, like, well, we know that these numbers were established in December of 2024 before tariffs. We know that tariffs probably are affecting it, maybe dropping the ability for people to pay, so that we really do need to have more scrutiny, and that's the conversation we can lead rather than changing the metrics that feed the initial part of the system.
I think that's an important point because the fact that these numbers have not been updated to include recent events is frustrating. And it puts us in a kind of an awkward position because can we approve a set of guidelines that's based on the assumption that the cost of services is only going to go up 2.96% if we actually think that inflation will be higher than that next year? But it's a matter of speculating in what we each read in our news sources. And it's not a comfortable place to be making these kind of determinations from.
That's why we do a preliminary guideline. After we do the metrics, and then we later on do a final guideline.
That's a good.
We have some time.
No, we can revisit this, but I like the reason to do the guidelines, the metrics in part is to provide some preliminary guidance to the budget entities as they're doing their work. And my understanding is that they're paying attention, and schools listen, schools will look at what comes out of this meeting. Ryan's sitting right here. Carrie she's not lurking online, I don't think, but she'll be following up on the results. I want us to come up with a number that we're comfortable with and that we feel is supported by the data, so that it serves as a tool. And Lindsay, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just one other thing I just thought of, the one thing that we don't seem to be covering here is what everyone's talking about is the volatility or unpredictability of the current moment that we're in. So if we're thinking about this either for another iteration or for next year, maybe in addition to the metrics, adding on some kind of measure of current volatility versus like the average historical volatility or unpredictability. If there is some kind of like general, I can't think of like an economic measure off the top of my head, but something that you could say, well, how much confidence do we actually have in the forecast this year relative to other years?
Maybe we could get antacid sales data.
Yeah, exactly. But some kind of score of that, just something to think about.
So I have a follow-on statement for that. Isn't that what our reserves are for?
That's the fallback, I think.
Right, I mean, but like I hate to say, oh, well, we'll just have that, but like it speaks to needing to have that reserve balance to deal with the moment that we're in right now, where it's really hard to plan what's happening tomorrow versus what's gonna happen in a year and a half.
So that's a good point. That's just additional pressure put on the financial policy work mode.
But your point's not lost, Lindsay, associated with, maybe there is some reason to annotate, like, hey, we need to have something additional to deal with that uncertainty, which is gonna lead to increases in cost, because people have to cost that in.
Well, when I think about the CPI component, it's a small piece of the towns and schools budget, but it's a big impact on the taxpayers because it makes a difference between a positive real income growth and negative. And as you say, if you try to really think about that, what that would mean if we had a tax increase bigger than nominal income growth at a time of negative real income growth, it would hurt twice as much as it ever did before. So I think we need to be that volatility metric. Lindsay is both applies to the cost side and the revenue side.
Are you ready for a motion?
Is there any more conversation? Are we ready for motion? Does someone want to make a concrete proposal that we've done in the past was establish the metric as a range from a low to a high. And we use the data that had been identified and presented. To do that, it was a little easier last year, because the charts lined up differently and we didn't have this, the same sense of unpredictability about economic conditions that we have now. Donna, are you ready to make a motion about a range, and then we can discuss the motion and see how people feel about it?
Well, a range of, well, I guess I would make a motion that we adopt these metrics as an input for our guidelines, but not as a range.
So not
Within
what
the
we did
guidelines.
last year, because last year we.
No, we had it as, these are kind of input, these are metrics that we're going to consider. We didn't do, we abandoned that
Okay.
that guardrail kind of approach.
In that case, I'm much more comfortable with this because we can share this information and share the caveat that we think that some aspects of this are unpredictable. And it's going to be maybe, it's going to increase the back and forth, I think, with the, it may not serve the same specific framework function that it did when we first started doing these metrics.
Yeah.
But I think it will still be useful for the budgeting entities to see what our thinking is. And then we start listening and thinking about some of the questions you raised, John. And start looking at what we're thinking, of what we're gonna arrive at for preliminary guidelines.
Yep.
So how does that translate into a motion with someone?
I can take a stab.
Good.
I move that the Finance Committee adopt the metrics presented in today's presentation regarding the projected real personal income growth per capita of 1.66, the projected nominal personal income growth per capita of 3.69, and the projected inflation relevant to Concord's school and town expenses of 2.96. How's that, Don?
I thank you, Carl, and I would add to that, subject to any revisions in the CBO metrics that resulted in these numbers.
I'll go with that.
Yeah.
That acceptable motion?
Yeah, I think it is. So I think we have a motion. Would anyone like to second it?
Second.
Second.
Okay, so
Okay.
second by Pat.
Any discussion?
So the one point that I think was brought up by multiple people is, do we want to caveat it with potentially adding in some sort of volatility? Like that we were looking towards trying to quantify volatility to possibly affect it, more than just this?
So you want to make an amendment, proposed?
It's a discussion, right?
Yeah.
So I would say when we come to the guidelines,
Okay.
Yes.
that would be the time
Okay, great.
to factor
That's
that.
cool. That's great. So that we could still use all this information
Yeah.
to work towards the guidelines. And then when we look at the guidelines, we could add something to it.
We could add that there are other modifiers we could consider. John may have a proposal for one, and I would say we should certainly consider all of these.
Okay, I'm all set.
Yeah, thanks.
John?
This one always just confuses me a little because we're not holding ourselves to anything, right? We're just saying we might use this range, but we're using these metrics. Is that the way I should?
This is
The way we did it last year is that we said these are metrics that will inform our guidelines. So we kind of kept it broad that, and these are kind of intended to be kind of a signal to the operating units of like, this is what the macro picture looks like. Assessment. So it's just metrics to inform the guidelines. Is how we worded it last year, I believe.
I think that's different than saying 1.66 to 3.69. That's kind of telling them, hey, here, we're already zeroing in on this versus what I believe Lindsay said is, here are the metrics we're using.
Right.
We just don't know where those metrics might be and that we're not already giving ourselves.
Right.
Just worried about what the message sends.
Well,
See, like I love the idea we're using these things. This is where it just is confusing to me because I'm in the school committee or the town, I might be like, sweet, this is what I'm now gonna look at my budget to be. I don't have to worry about it being lower.
I
No,
think
no.
well, I think the way it's worked in the past, both with the formulation we used last year and also when we had more, we more specifically defined a range. It capped expectations. So you can,
See what he said there.
and it capped expectations with some focus on the cost bar, I think. But the cost bar in past years was higher than the increase in ability to pay, which it isn't this year. If you use these metrics, and I personally would be very surprised.
None of it's
That's the
binding
only
anyway. I
cost
don't
increase.
overthink this. I just kind of.
Yeah.
No, just to,
What we're saying, here's a range of guidelines, you know, so
Yeah.
that kind of just throws me for a loop.
We're saying these are the macro indicators that will, that up the economy that we're going to be using in our deliberations.
Okay,
We're not at all committing to this range.
gotcha, okay.
Lindsay, you had something to add?
yes, I was going to say the exact same thing that Don just said. I think we should stay away from words like cap or range. Like, I think these are just metrics, macro metrics that will be one factor we consider.
So what we're not, we're doing two things. We're accepting as a committee that these are the high level metrics that we will be looking at as we develop the guidelines. And then we should formulate how we're advising the budgeting entities about that. So if we pass a motion that says these are the metrics that we will be using as an action item, someone, Don, should get a letter out to budgeting entities that tells them what metrics we're going to be looking to and put some context around it.
We have them for last year.
What?
We did that last year.
Yeah.
We did that last year.
So it's not, so that may protect us against the any setting of expectations, John, once we contextualize this the way we have in our discussion. Okay. So where did we end up?
We have a motion, we have a second, we've had discussion.
Right.
Ready to call discussion, do the roll call?
Reread the motion so we can all have it fresh, and then let's do the roll call.
Okay.
Unless there's further discussion.
The motion I made was, I move that the finance committee adopt the metrics as presented in the presentation today, which are 1.66 projected real personal income growth per capita, 3.69 projected nominal personal income growth per capita, and 2.96 projected inflation relevant to Concord's school and town expenses.
I'm going to make a suggestion about that we should cite the source of those metrics. Because that's really what we're saying to the budgeting entities. We're going to use the CBO projections as of December 2024
Okay.
that produce these numbers.
Okay. As reflected in the Congressional Budget Office projections as of December 2024.
Right.
Subject to
Yeah,
update.
I would say the latest published, right?
Yeah, latest.
The latest published CBO projections from December 2024.
So then why don't we just take out the numbers altogether, to say the latest CBO projections for projected real personal income?
That got some numbers in there.
Yeah, it's too hard to figure for people to go back and figure. This is for 27. It's a month by month thing. You have to calculate it.
Thank you.
Fiscal 27. And when we get past that, I'm going to just speak to John.
Do you want to clarify as well that it's not a guideline or metric, or it's not a guideline or cap, and
Yes.
Yeah,
it's only one of many inputs that will be considered?
that, I think that's for, I agree, that should go into the letter that
Letter.
communicates this decision to the budgeting entities, so I think first, we as a committee have to decide that we're comfortable with defining these as the metrics we're gonna be using. And then the next step is to give Don the assignment, of writing the letter. And so why don't we have the vote of the motion first, and then we can go around and give Don input on what we'd like to see in the letter, and then assign him the task of writing it.
Now can we do the roll call?
Yes.
Oh, what? Okay, this is the roll call on the motion regarding the metrics. Peggy Briggs,
Yes.
Brian Conway,
Yes.
Kathy Kukalo,
Yes.
Eric Dahlberg,
Yes.
John Garofalo,
Yes.
Pat Geyer,
Yes.
Gerard Jansen,
Yes.
Don Kupka,
Yes.
Lindsay Liss,
Yes.
Arlen Reed, yes. Paul Rodriguez.
Yes.
Sri Tupel,
Yes.
Lois Wasoff.
Yes.
Did I miss anybody? No. Okay, then it's unanimous support. Motion passes.
So let's just continue the discussion for another couple of minutes. And is there any specific input that any of us would like to give to Don beyond what we've already discussed? We've already discussed that this will be caveated. His letter will explain what these are, explain when they were developed, explain that these could change if the CBO issues updated information. Anything else that we want to be, that these are not to be considered, these are separate from the guidelines, which we will develop, but these are the metrics we'll be using in the development of the guidelines. Anything else that we want to add to that?
So I think it'd be important to highlight that, you know, if these numbers are based on December 2024, a lot of the uncertainty that we're seeing these days is after that fact. So laying the groundwork that, you know, we may need to put that into the guidelines. So it's important to highlight this, but they're, you know, as people read their newspapers, things could change.
Yeah, we'll be considering later developments as we actually do the guidelines development.
Yeah.
Yeah. Say uncertainty is the word of the year.
Oh. Among a few others. If there's no more discussion on this, then we are done. And I think entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make said motion.
Okay.
We're adjourned.
I'm not doing it.